Hey guys, I'm Mikey Microphone, and the microphone is a metaphor for the fact that you have something beautiful to say, but you need to make the arrangements so that you can be heard. Right now, what I'm going to talk about is fonts. And, if you remember back in the day, there was only like 5 or 6 fonts that you could use on the web. Now, there are good options. There's some providers, including Google, but also including others. I'm using Google, and recently one of their fonts changed pretty dramatically. It's actually the font that I use for the text of the book, so it's like really a very important one for me, and I was kind of I was like super disappointed that it seemed like this might be out of my control. But I have actually, off camera, I found a solution. So I figured, actually, in this case, waiting to address it may have benefited me because I was able to, maybe not though, I was able to find somebody else discussing it. And so I knew that I wasn't crazy, that Google had actually smurfed this up behind the scenes. Basically, in the past, it was delivered as a light font, and then they moved to delivering this one. And that made my text look like this, which wasn't a total shock. But when I looked at how that looked next to the chapter weight, I started to feel like it really wasn't good enough. So the way that I solved it, I first tried to update the style sheet so that it would say font weight light. I tried a few other things, but I knew that Google was only kind of delivering one of the weights in the font file that my browser was downloading. So what I did was I came to their interface, I changed it around to this, I clicked the little plus button to add that here. I looked in here at the URL that they were providing. So I'm not actually directly putting these URLs in my code. I'm using a plugin that loads Google's fonts. So I figured it might work for me to just kind of rename the font with this suffix, and it did. So I guess maybe I do have to include both. Oh wait, I'll save this file. Great. Yeah, I like that better. Yeah, I think that's easier to read. So now I have this interface is using a similar font. It actually has, at this juncture, it has a different padding. Padding is 86 pixels for this and only 46 for this. Okay, so there's a width overflow here. Okay. So the width is specified as 90% here. Probably with the additional padding on the left. Yeah, you can see basically a difference of 40 pixels here. The additional padding on the left has jumped that up. Let's move this to 80. And then there, this is pretty close. It's still not an exact match for the way the text is going to be displayed when they're done editing it, but it's a relatively good approximation. And if they need to edit it again, that is certainly something that I want to support. The fact that this edit interface basically matches the displayable interface is what I also want to offer for this and this. So that is the subject of this video. Also providing a cancel interface so that I can dismiss those without making a change would be nice. But first things first, the font styling of the edit form. So I guess I'll start at the top for this, the chapter, book.editing. Bookshelf display of book. Title of book. All right, so let's see where this font is coming from, style sheet wise. Chapters.css. And let's see, okay, so this doesn't really seem to have any editing styles in it. The editing, book.editing, okay, so text area, controls, focus tool, which I've now replaced with a new focus tool, and then paragraph form. Okay, so the editing interface exists as a page that contains the whole book, but the editing interface that I want to encourage people to actually use is one that edits chapter by chapter. So the question is which style sheet to put it in. And I think what I'm going to do is follow the step that I started to take earlier today and start to split out style sheets that are meant for different users. So I'm gonna, the thing is that depending on how many of these styles, so these styles are all things that I think I will want for this form. It might be nice to actually drop them right on top, so I could say like chapter title, comma, like text field, input dot chapter title, and that way they could share the same rule. The problem is that this is currently being nested within read by chapter. Actually, read by chapter is also a style that's used during editing. So I might be able to get this here. When I hit edit, this is an input, it has a type, it has a name, it does not have an ID. But it is inside a read by chapter. Okay. Chapter title. I suppose all I'll have to do is add this class name to the element, which I think is probably being rendered by this. So placeholders, chapter title, class, chapter underscore title. Okay, so the centering directive didn't land. That's probably because in order to center an element like that, you need to go up a level to the thing that's containing it. So this form doesn't have, it has an ID, but it has no class. Okay. At this point, I am going to start moving stuff into a separate style sheet. So we're going to say book editing, chapter editing. All right, so let's see if that changes the way that the form itself is displayed. Okay, great. And I can give it a width. Okay. Let's see if that did anything for the form. So the form is wide. The input, let's see if anything is impacting its width. This is being overridden. Let's see. Okay, this width, it's in a grayed out thing that doesn't give me the arrow for where to go. Okay, well that helped. And then thinking about the subtitle, chapter subtitle. That will give it the font. So if I go into the chapter helper, add the class name here. Let's see how this works. Okay, So the font size, the font is correct. The font size is not. And the way that it's spaced out on the page is not quite right. It's being squished in too much. So let's see. I think if I'm lucky, I'll be able to widen this out. This is not likely to work. Huh. Oh, the width. Okay, so the width is being specified by a rule with higher. Yeah, so here's the rule that I just wrote. Here is the rule that is taking precedence because it has more class names. Okay. So the 58% width, I think, is taking effect. The width of this is the same. The font size, I would like to also match. So here we have oh, it's actually kind of cool, this inspector for the actual text. Text node. Wonder if that's useful for anything. So again, thinking about the font size, I don't see any particular directives here, so I'm going to go up to the full list. And what does it say? It says height. It's a header. It's a header probably is pretty important here. I'm surprised. I'm still a little surprised it doesn't have more attributes. Maybe if I change it so it's not a header, we'll see if that has an impact. Okay. I think what I will try to do is just kind of fudge it. So I'm gonna chapter form text area. I know what's in there, so I'm gonna just say text or font size 1.2 and see if that gets me pretty close to a. Okay, that's too big. So actually just make it 1. Okay, that's pretty close. Okay. So there might be a bit of a difference here if I stretch. Ah, it still actually fits. Okay, great. So I'll review my changes to the code. Tighten that up, added a new style sheet. corrected the font that I'm using and added some class names to share the fonts with the editing tool. Okay, so this I do refer to wizards throughout the book, but this is like the very first part, so I don't know if they yet know who it is. Okay. The wizards. So just to recap, this is the only part of the editing interface which isn't currently Ajaxified. The reason that it refreshes the page is because the number of the chapter changes when I create a new version, and that's because I retain the old versions. The reason I decided to let the page refresh at that point was so that in case the person did refresh the page, then it would still work. Let's see if there is a way. So tell the browser where to go if the user refreshes. This looks promising, but this article is 5 years newer. So I think it's possible that I could handle an event like on before unload. Okay, so this is a good point. Server side, I could handle the situation server side. I could figure out a way to detect when the chapter being loaded was actually one that had just been updated. I could do the redirect on that side. And that actually seems like a great option. But for now, what I will possibly do is, yeah, actually I like that, because if they're in the middle of editing something else and they're also editing this, I don't want it to refresh. So I'm going to go ahead and add that to my okay, so refresh of just edited chapter. Directed to new version of chapter. So looking at where that movement actually is triggered, it's here. So I can comment this out. And I can edit this again, and it will just edit itself in place without dismissing this interface. If I were to then refresh this, I'll look at the controller to see if I can surmise what would happen. Chapters, controller. Edit as. So it's going to look for this. If that doesn't work because this chapter is no longer in this edition, then instead of looking for the chapter, I'll look for the chapter-ish TOC, which is in that position in the ordering. It would be cool to also redirect them to the correct URL. So basically, instead of 68, this would go to 69. But I think this will kind of work even without it. Oh, here we go. Ordering. Okay, so ordering is an attribute of the table of content, not of the chapter. So the table of content that was tying that chapter to that edition has now been deleted because when I update a chapter, it deletes the well, it just changes the chapter ID. Okay. So the old chapter, I could look at the previous edition of the book, but if the chapter has been edited, if the details of the chapter have been edited more than one time, then the okay. So I think that it's actually not going to be possible at this point without some kind of state being put into the cookie or something like that. But let's think. So cookie, I can edit the cookie on the client side, and then when this code is running on the server side, I could look at the cookie. This is an interesting topic, and I do want to explore it, and I do want to... Okay, I'm just going to presume this is actually 69 now. I do want to provide that interface to my prospective authors where they can be editing multiple things at once and also edit the chapter title. So I will explore this, but for now my priority is to get a video out. And in order to do that, there is 1 or 2 more styling changes that I want to complete, which are basically along the same lines as what I just did with the fonts for these chapter headings. So just going to find a chapter that has section headings. Okay. So going into here. Okay. So this is so if I refresh this, I can see where this got its styling from. And again, it's basically just getting it from this class name, which is something that I can add to the helper, which is generating that form. I can go to the style sheet and I can, sections helper, I can give a class name to this form. I wish that this helper was already giving itself a class name, and I think that the Rails helpers have changed, whereas they used to give me all these IDs and classes as part of this, the output of this API. If anyone knows A, why that changed, or B, how to get it back, please let me know. But for now, it's easy enough to also just specify manually. So this is fine, as they say. So I created a section form. I can go to my editing thing, make something similar to this. Chapter form, section form. Don't think I want the alignment to be centered. I think I want the alignment to just simply have a margin left. All right, let's see how this lines up. Okay. That actually sort of works for me. Successive edits don't seem to land, but So this is taller than it needs to be. This is a little awkward looking. But this is fine.